So I'll do that again because it's been over a year. Sorry, apologies. Let me get that right. I'll get that right. I always make one mistake, Dorothy. Always. Right.
Only one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you've been on before, have you? Okay. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and we're here to talk about the Thornhill Review because it's just past 1 year since it came out, and it was widely praised for an honest account of where the Lib Dems are, some of the strategic and problems within our party, and what we can do to fix them. So who better than our two guests we've got with us? We have the lady herself, Baroness Dorothy Thornhill, and she's insisted I call her Dorothy. Welcome to the podcast, Dorothy.
Lovely to be with you, John.
And also the party president, Mark Pack, returning to the podcast as well to give a kind of, so we get a proper review of what's happening at HQ, what's happening on the ground. So I think this will be really good. Welcome again to the podcast, Mark.
Lovely to be back, John. And I hope my microphone is working better this time. There'll be no ghostly, little footsteps appearing in the background, I hope.
Absolutely not. See, this is investment. This is what we're talking about. Investment in the future for better outcomes. So, but we asked listeners, Dorothy, about what they would like us to talk about on this episode when we heard you were coming on. And I'd say 90% of them were saying, okay, what's happened in this last year? What improvements have been made? What can you see that we are doing to offset some of the mistakes that had happened? So what, in your view, has happened?
Okay, can I kick off by saying to all our ordinary members who are the most important people, I liken them to the fans of the football team. I think it's really understandable in a way that they're saying what's happened, because actually a lot of the problems were so endemic and deep, and I can't stress that enough, that it really did need root and branch, to use that horrible cliche. And some things happened absolutely immediately. But as the ripples go out to our members, they might not see it. They see it if we win. So let's start with that. We won, and we won well. And that, in a sense, is a sign that some of the other things are actually working. So the two biggies for me were around the culture in the place, and the professional readiness of the organisation as a proper organisation. And I would say that there has been significant improvement on those two big fronts, if you like. There were lots of little recommendations that were all, technical and bureaucratic, but the biggies were around how healthy is our organisation as a place to work and be part of, in that culture, and how ready for that, and the culture that goes alongside that. And one of the things the review did say was, let's be brave enough to look outside the Lib Dem family for help. In fact, some of our problems were because we were too insular. We were worried about criticising people who were our friends, who we were loyal to, who were actually even our family members. And so I think in some of the key senior appointments, the president and the leader were actually brave enough to say, actually, we need to look outside, and we need to bring in new blood and new thinking. And, obviously you're going to ask us gazillions of questions, so I'll stop there and say, actually, that was really brave and really good. And boy, has it worked.
And Mark, just your kind of comeback on that as well, just because obviously everyone's delighted about Cheshire and Amersham. People are, and we're not trying to sort of get a negative mood back into the party, because it really has just energized the party, that result. I got so many tweets, so many people contacting me saying, oh my, that was amazing, who saw that coming? It's really given us hope. So we're not trying to do that down, but like Dorothy's just said, there was this isn't just one election, it wasn't just 2019, this is something that spanned over years.
Yeah, and I was looking at some of the press cuttings after previous dramatic by-election wins, and I think actually the late Charles Kennedy comments after we won in Ribble Valley in 1991, so when we were similarly on the road back from some really tough years, in that case around the merger, and his phrase was, one swallow doesn't make a summer, this is one step. And I think that's absolutely the right mindset. It is an amazing, brilliant, fantastic, huge step, but it's still one step on a long road that we have to go. And I think the most important thing about Dorothy's report in many ways is that it exists, and it is a constant reminder to us to what we all need to change, because we are, as a party, surprisingly small c conservative internally. We definitely like being radical in terms of our policies, but partly because we have really complicated governance structures, partly for all of the dynamics that you get in any big, complicated organization around how risk averse people can end up being and so on. It's really easy to end up always doing tomorrow what you did yesterday. And Dorothy and her colleagues have given us a report that is a constant reminder that that's not what we need. That's not good enough. And it's, if Dorothy doesn't mind me paying tribute to her, it's really good that she has continued to stay engaged. So as we're recording this, it's a couple of days after we had a day-long federal board meeting, and Dorothy came to that to give everyone on the board an update on how she sees us doing in terms of implementing the report. And that's crucial, because too many previous general election reports have not resulted in that sort of sustained implementation.
So I'll take one of the questions, and this is kind of, someone's come straight from one of our listeners who said, having recommended a root and branch review of the governance and organisation, what progress have we made? Because from this person's point of view, they haven't seen much. Now, I assume that root and branch is an interesting analogy to you, because actually, if you talk about things, a lot of things happen under the surface, which then take a long time before they actually flower up, to keep that kind of metaphor going. And is that where we are at the moment, Dorothy?
Well, or to keep my football metaphor going, the fans only see if you win on the pitch, but what they're not seeing is all the backroom staff, all the techie stuff, all of that. But of course, they all have views, don't they? What is the winning formation to play? And I think it's a bit like that. So in a sense, I share their frustration, because in many ways, I'm an ordinary member. I'm not in any big committees. I'm not in the inner sanctum. So I can say the same, from where I'm sitting, just as a campaigner in Watford now. What do I see? But from my privileged position of being the report author and having a very open, I called it the three-legged stool in the report, with Ed, Mark and Mike, and they've responded to every single, if I've had criticism from anybody about anything, I've gone straight to them. I've had prompt answers. I've had easy access. So I've kind of been as if I've been the privileged person in the back room of the footy club, being able to see that these things are happening. And, we will only see it out on the pitch, but they have been happening. But certainly Mark and I share a frustration. Some things are moving more quickly than others. So organisationally, our new chief exec has got things, we're now doing things properly and legally and all those other horrible things, we're getting those right. Governance is Mark's baby, and he'll talk more about that. But actually, I don't envy him his job, because we are Lib Dems, and as Paddy Ashdown famously said, it's like herding cats. There are, and all the other wonderful quotes about ourselves. And so it's the toughest thing, because turkeys don't vote for Christmas. But yet there are governance instances where we are, to use another cliche, marking our own homework. So that's the one that's probably not been as quick as certainly the review team would like. And, I'll almost hand over to Mark to say, is it as quick as El Presidente would like?
Before Mark comes in, Mark, because one of the things I was reading, I've got some quotes directly from the review. And so one of the points leads on directly on this was, our functional purpose, winning seats in elections, has too often come second to internal discussion and management. And I think a lot of people found that, Mark. So what has happened regarding that?
And well, let me just give one example, which is my current favourite little example. In our internal election rules for federal committee elections, when all members get to vote every 3 years, we have hard coded into the rules that every member should be told what the attendance rate is of every committee member in the previous cycle. That's the one bit of information, how often do you turn up to meetings, that we've decided collectively in the past is absolutely vital for members to know. Nothing about how many votes you've spoken to or how good a job you've done, purely attendance. Now, I will definitely plead guilty to having made hay out of having had 100% attendance rate in previous internal manifesto. So I don't criticise it, but just use it as an example to illustrate how we do have an internal culture that prioritises sometimes the right things, definitely. I mean, the board, we decided to postpone the meeting, so it was just after rather than just before Amersham polling day, and people were very happy with doing that. And I think it definitely felt the right decision. But too often, our internal culture prioritises the wrong things. But I think the reason I've emphasised the word culture, and I think this comes back to your question, John, is in the past we've tended to see the right response to governance problems to say, let's have a big review of all of the detailed rules. And rules are really important, and details of rules can be really helpful or really unhelpful. But fundamentally, the dysfunctional relationship between, for example, leader, chief exec, and president that Dorothy and her colleagues documented quite painfully, particularly when you read between the lines in a few places in their report. Yet you can't fix that with rules. So I do genuinely believe we've made a lot of progress, that we've got a really good working relationship amongst the three legs of the stools. We've made, the board has taken the difficult, but I think right step of piloting the steering group approach. And we've just been discussing at our meeting this weekend about what to do with that pilot and when to come to conference with proposals and so on. But because it's about culture, it's a bit harder to point to specific items. I think the one other thing I would say is I'd really encourage people involved in other bits of the party to think about how their bits can change and improve. I know the English Party is looking again this summer at what reforms or not it might want to make to its own activities. I'd really encourage everyone to engage in that in a really positive way.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, LibDem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Rains website at praetorrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Mark, in response to that, so again, one of the questions asked is, will we get, instead of like big reform, this huge review, this is all the things we're doing, are we going to get progress reports? Because I'm not on any sort of federal policy committees, and most ordinary members have no idea what committees there are, what they do, and it's all another world to them. But what we want to know is how we're doing on that progress. So will there be interim kind of progress reports?
Yeah, definitely. There have been, I hope, helpful progress reports in my monthly report back to party members, which appear on the website in the ad lib section, and in the reports twice a year to party conference. And yeah, I'm always happy to look at how we can improve those reports, how we can get them read more widely by members and so on. So if anyone does have any feedback on that, or if they've been missing the reports and think they should be appearing somewhere else, very happy for people to pop me an email and get into the details of that discussion.
Lovely. Now, back to you, Dorothy. Now, one of the, again, quoting directly from your review, you said we ran an over-optimistic campaign that lacked necessary strategic planning over many years. Now, we're all very excited at the moment. We've just had a fantastic election win, but obviously 2024 or 2023, depending on when the government decides to call it, is going to be around very quickly. What steps?
Quickly,
yeah. Well, is that going to come too quickly? What are we preparing for? Tom Morrison, obviously from Cheadle, one of our target candidates said, look, we probably need 2025 by-election style target seats to kind of really go for. Is that where your head is at? Or?
Right. Well, I was absolutely delighted that the one thing that moved forward quickly and successfully was the investment in the field team. Now, we know it's not absolutely perfect and we know there's more that can be done, always the case. but it is significantly stronger than it was. And the party, even in dwindling resources, and I think it's important that members out there remember, we've had to really cut our cloth accordingly. And that has been difficult and challenging. And there's been some kickback on it. But the field team were invested in. Training has been invested in. And I've had lots of really positive feedback about that. We very quickly selected the target seats. Mark's got more of the what I call the nitty-gritty detail of that. But I obviously get regular updates, and I'm pleased that that has happened. And certainly, we're not a target seat in any way. But my own campaign team in Watford feel very much that the field team are in touch with us. They're helpful. They're not telling us what to do, which is one of the big criticisms. So there's been a culture shift in that. And certainly talking to Kath Pinnock, who's really running Batley and Spen, she's saying that the party aren't coming in with their big boots and saying, oh, this is the way you do it, and annoying everybody. They're saying, what do you want to get out of this? How can we help? So I think that thing alone shows culture shift, in the right investment by the party, and obviously a significant outcome. So if people in target seats are tuning into all the stuff that's available to them, they will be tooled up. If they're not, they won't be. But it is there, and I think that's really real progress.
And I wonder how we kind of get this back, because again, Preston is nowhere near any sort of target seat. I get that. But we still want local parties to have an optimism for something better. We can't just be Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, a couple of leafy suburbs in Manchester, and Tim Farron. We have to give Lib Dems, who, and Mark knows, we did a podcast with Alan Hackett, who's been fighting for 50 odd years in Preston, and the pride he takes in the work he does in this area is enormous, and so will lots of other Lib Dems. So we need to get that balance right, don't we? Strategically planning a correct campaign to win as many seats as feasible, but also allowing Lib Dems to be happy and optimistic in areas where they're not going to win.
For me, I was going to say, to Mark, you can always win somewhere. I mean, I would say Fulwood, Ingle, Ashton.
That's very good. For anyone who don't know, she's basically named all the Lib Dem really strong points in Preston. So, well done, Dorothy.
It's my hometown, and I do know it. So I think, and that's why the Batley and Spen, I gave that analogy, because Kath just wants some damn good canvassing done in her target wards for May. Yeah. And if we manage to give her that, she will be thrilled, and so will all the foot soldiers over in Kirklees. They'll be thinking the party's wonderful. So let's do that. Let's not tell them that they're writing their leaflets incorrectly or they're not doing whatever. They know what they're doing. So I think the party has got its eyes on both of those, because we all know that the opinion polls are based on the whole country. And also we also know that the credibility for the Lib Dems is based on what happens locally. And, so we have to win council seats. We have to run more councils, because then the populace in that area goes, well, actually, they run the council quite well. I'll put my tick. But if they've never heard of us, they're never going to put that cross, not tick.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, and I think there's a really important balancing act here, because one of the things Chesham and Amersham illustrates that's massively positive is the number of, it's the several dozen or so very plausible seats we can hope to win at the next election. And we won't win all of them, most likely. And if politics goes amazingly well, who knows, maybe we can get excited about more beyond that. But there's a really credible core set of target seats. But it's also the case that those are not enough to do well in rounds of May local elections. They're not enough to have the growing party membership. They're not enough to be a significant player on the national political stage. So as well as really concentrating the effort in the seats that we really think we can win next time, we do need to be doing well at other levels of elections all across the UK. And, in Scotland and Wales, they've got their once every 5-year local elections next year, for example. If we're not making progress in those, actually the bad news from that will hamper our ability to win seats in leafy southern England at the next general election as well. So I think that and I was saying this to Mike Dixon, our CEO, when we were talking last week. I think that's one of the big dilemmas that we need to grapple with, over the next year, is getting the balance of breadth and depth right. Cheshire and Amersham has shown the power of the depth, but one of the reasons we won was because people like you, John, you councillor from Preston, coming down to help. We had Hannah, for example, another regular on the Lib Dem pod, councillor herself in Northern England, again coming down to help. Is that it's the breadth of the party as well contributed to the success in Cheshire and Amersham. So that balance is a tricky one, and I suspect whether the next general election review is a happy or a sad one, how we did on getting that balance right is going to be a big part of whether it's Dorothy or one of her or someone else who does the next review that they will need to look at.
Careful, they nearly signed up there, Dorothy.
That's a yes then, is it?
Definitely someone else. It's not an easy gig, believe me.
I want to, before we go on to kind of one of the comments, so we were talking about beliefs and translating that into a vision, which was again part of your review. I want to read a question that is again someone who's commented on the questions that we asked, basically wants to know a little bit more detail. So I'm going to read this because this person has more information than I do. So this says, the federal board has tinkered with things, e.g. just set up a steering committee. HQ, they approve of the money being spent on staff in regions, but the English party has done very little, and the regional and local parties haven't been encouraged to do anything. Now, this person's obviously taken quite a critical view, maybe, of how the year's gone. Now, what they're saying is whether we really need 4 levels of I assume, committees, 4 levels of how we're going down it, and the relationship between them. So are we, I think, put it in a nutshell, are we still too fat organisationally, and do we need to slim down? So, because somewhere like, again, Preston, not really on anyone's radar massively. What difference will your review, Dorothy, make to Preston?
Well, I hoped that in a sense, that's an interesting critique, but the review was very clear. In a sense, I was being very federal. I was hoping that more autonomy would be given to regions and regional chairs. I mean, let's face it, and this isn't controversial. We've got regional chairs that are absolutely damn brilliant, and people who it's just a nice title that they quite like and it sounds important. And we want them all to be the former. So I think the thrust of the report was around that. I mean, for example, in our region, we're in the eastern region. That's just a fluke of geography. It's a weird one, that one, but never mind. I think in Watford, we should know, and I believe we do, which are the target seats next time. Therefore, who should we be helping in Watford? And somebody should be encouraging us to work together now, train together now, so that by the time the general election comes, it's pretty obvious to us that obviously we're going to help Daisy next door in St Albans, but we also know South Cambs or Hitchin and Harpenden, and we know the people there because we've worked together now. And I think that is about the regions to make that happen and stop this blame culture, book passing to HQ. There's nothing in the structures that we've got now that stop this happening now. It's just that we don't do it. Mark is much more of a geek on this than me, and I'm sure we'll have some excellent responses. But that's my drift, if you like. That's where we were coming from in the report. And
I'm sure, from an ordinary kind of campaigner, activist, councillor, from my point of view, I don't rely on HQ as much, I think, as some people who don't campaign often think you have to. It's a point where if you think that HQ is going to win you Cadley Ward next year in Preston, you're probably going to lose it. You have to be the architect of your own success in these kind of in lots of areas. But I'm sure Mark can give his view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I presume the question is from England, because the way the different levels of the party work, I think, in Scotland and Wales, frankly, works a lot better. Partly because there is a Scottish politics, there is a Welsh politics, there's a Welsh Senate, there's a Scottish Parliament. And so I think the levels that we have actually work well in Scotland and Wales generally. But in England, this is a long running question about, you've got local and regional and English and then federal. And do we really need all four? I think we definitely need the federal level. And I'm aware that one of the best ways of sinking any English party reforms is for the federal party to come in and say to the English party, this is what we think you must do. So I quite genuinely think the best way of encouraging the English party to continue to look at what it's doing and how to improve is actually for me to not say, here is the solution that I think you should have. And because I think that will just be counterproductive. But I do think we have changed a lot. The workings of the three legs of the stool are completely transformed from a couple of years ago. The director team at HQ is completely transformed from 2 years ago. The network of regional grassroots campaign support staff across the country is the largest it's ever been in the first half of the Parliament, as far as I can figure out from the record books, history books. And it's an integrated team, and that has involved funding from state parties, from regional parties. Some of those staff managed via LDC, some via the federal party. And obviously there's a little bit of tension there sometimes, but overall it's working coherently as one large grassroots support team in a way that we've never had before. So I think there are some really big, significant changes. There's also, I think, perhaps one of the most important things coming along later this year is the plans for what's called Project Stella are being finalised, which is a support scheme for candidates from ethnic minorities who are selected in the party's top seats, to give them extra support to make sure we get more of them elected in the future. And previously, we very much concentrated our diversity efforts on getting more diverse candidates selected, and that's really important. But what this is looking to add is then extra support for candidates once they're selected to then help make sure they actually get elected, because too often in the past we've had quite diverse looking candidate lists that hasn't come through. So lots of stuff happening. Could go on for much longer, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of why I think the question was maybe being a little bit too pessimistic.
So I'm going to do my own Thornhill-esque review of this podcast and say, right, we've talked enough about structures. Let's talk about vision. And so again, as I alluded to just before, our beliefs, and we have wonderful policies. And I keep on meeting people that say, I was a Lib Dem my whole life. I didn't know it. And because we don't translate that over in practice. So Dorothy, how do we do that? How do you want to see the party do that in the next 2 years before the general election?
I think it's about leadership. I have to say that. Because, I look back on my own tenure as the mayor of Watford, what actually made people vote for our team, well, I had a 16-year term, and we very, very clearly set out our stall. We were very clear about our vision, what we believed in, how we saw the town. We didn't nip and tuck according to popular opinion, and when the wind blew, I was dubbed the pro-development mayor by the Tories. And, they really went to town on me on that election. But they didn't gain anything because people understood why we were doing the development, understood what was going on. The same thing has to happen with our leadership. It's not about just getting a focus group necessarily to tell us what's on their mind, but it is about listening to what's on people's minds. It is about answering those kind of questions. I always say, would this be relevant down the Tudor Arms? And if the answer is no, it wouldn't be, then it wasn't on my radar, or it wasn't something I gave big attention to. And I think that's the fundamental tension within the party. And one of the lines in the report that for me personally were very important was the one that said, as members, we have to decide whether we're a political party that wants to govern and impact on the lives of people in this country, or are we just a series of pressure groups? And I think that is something only the membership itself can actually work with, but led by our leader. And that's the leader's role. Matt Dixon, sort the organisation out. Mark, keep the members happy, keep us all on the track. But, you look to a leader to capture that vision, to say what it is in ways that are relevant to people down the Tudor Arms, the Red Lion, the mosque, the Gurdwara, wherever people meet.
Mark?
Yeah, I think Chesham and Amersham is a really good example of this. The Green Party had their preconceived ideological, as it were, decision that they thought this election should be about scrapping HS2. So the Greens were the most anti-HS2 candidate. The Rejoin EU, they had their own preformed ideological view. This election should be about undo Brexit ASAP. Both of them failed. The Green Party vote share dropped. Rejoin EU got, I think it was 101 votes. They did just get into three figures, but only just. Green Party vote dropped. Green Party lost their deposit. What we did, by contrast, was we started with listening to voters. So, well, what matters most to you? What's the overlap with our values? And that provides the fertile ground. And I think that's the point that, Dorothy's report really emphasises, and I think still we maybe as a party haven't fully internalised, but we got right in Chesham and Amersham, is you have to start with what the voters think. We might want to change their minds. We might want to persuade them that something is important that they don't appreciate is important, but you have to start with what the voters think, because if you don't, you end up doing what the Greens and Rejoin EU did in Chesham and Amersham, which is completely misreading the room and suffering the electoral consequences for it.
And we're in a very interesting point now, because obviously many people have heard our episode with John Curtis about that direction. Where is the Lib Dem vision? Do we just go for that Remainer vote? But then we've just had a fantastic win in Chesham and Amersham, where actually Brexit didn't appear in any one of our leaflets. So it is a very interesting where it's going to go. But as we get near the close of this interview, and thank you both for being on, I wonder if you could point out, Dorothy, the one thing you think has been the biggest success since your review that has actually changed, and the one thing you think we desperately still need to do before we get to the next general election. If that isn't too tough or harsh.
Yeah,
I'm ready to take detailed notes here, Dorothy.
Two joint ones, really. I think the field team and the organisation are the ones that are going nicely along the right lines. The governance is definitely the one that is slipping. You only said one, but you can't just say one. We invest in technology. We need to get more technology. But if I'm really, really honest, I still don't think we've got the messaging and the visioning and being and the relevant to people bit right yet.
Mark?
Yeah, I think I'd probably paint a pretty similar picture to Dorothy, reassuringly. It definitely feels, from my perspective, that we've made more progress on the organisation than on the messaging. We've definitely made progress on the messaging, and Chesham and Amersham, again, demonstrated that we can have very effective messages, but it does feel like that's the area that's much more a work in progress, partly because I think organisationally we know what a successful general election organisation looks like. With messaging, it's still a lot harder to pin down things like what is going to be the line on Europe that best hits that overlap of our values and beliefs and where the voters are at. But definitely messaging feels like the one that we need to give renewed emphasis to in the second half of this year. And we've begun to do it with getting the market research in place and so on to inform that. But definitely that needs we need to have the sort of progress on that we've had on things like the field work, putting the field team in place.
And it's a double-edged sword, as someone who works in marketing, companies spend billions of pounds trying to get messaging right, and sometimes it falls completely flat. And you can just see 2019 was a perfect example. The whole bollocks to Brexit thing worked brilliantly in our Euros and our local elections. It gave us, but then fell very flat when Revoke kind of came into it and in the general election. So sometimes these things are very, very complicated and not an easy solution.
Dare I interject on that, John? Because I think one thing we mustn't forget is that lots of Remain people actually care about the reasons why people voted to leave.
Yeah.
I call these people caring conservatives, both with a small c, but they're not insensitive to the fact that swathes of the country feel that they're cast adrift, and I think we mustn't forget that. I think we can rely on people when we say, look, this is what we feel our priorities should be. They do get that.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be afraid, and we shouldn't forget those reasons why people voted to leave. I think that should be at the core of our message.
And that sea change
to that.
And it's not just go back to Europe.
And I think that's where John Curtis's take I think was slightly wrong, in that I think the experience of a lot of people who were canvassing in Chesham and Amersham was that very few people spontaneously said, I want us to get back into the European Union, etc. But that's not to say that Brexit wasn't an issue. It was more that it had set a general sense of, here is a government that is doing the wrong thing, that doesn't really understand what it's doing, that doesn't care about people like me in areas like this. And so it was an issue, but not in a let's therefore put Brexit all over our leaflets and campaign to rejoin tomorrow. And I think that's where John Curtis's analysis, which is always worth listening to carefully, but I think that's where he got the political application of his analysis, I think, slightly wrong, is that we do need to stay very true to those international values. But at the moment, for example, that means there's much more mileage, I think, in talking about the need for international cooperation over vaccines than there is about what's the deadline we're going to set for when we think we should be back in the single market. And that getting that balance right really has to be driven by listening to the voters, because you want to be a couple of steps ahead of the voters. In that sense, you can drag them in your direction. But if you're 30 steps ahead of them, they just say, hey, no, you're off in the wrong direction. I'm not going to listen to you.
That is so true, Mark. I really agree with that example you just gave.
There we go. We couldn't ask for a better way of ending the podcast there, Mark, can you? I don't know if you'd arranged that.
Yeah, but not at all.
Thank you so much, you two, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. And I suppose if anyone's got further questions or suggestions, as Lib Dems always do, by all means, either send them to us at the Lib Dem Podcast, send it to Mark, and just because this is an ongoing process. Lib Dems have had a bit of a rough time since 2005. It wasn't just coalition. There has been issues in our party since that time. And so to turn this thing around, we are going to make stumbles. We are going to make mistakes. But if we're getting a good level of trajectory towards a better place, that's what people like me and ordinary members can live with, as long as we feel like there's some improvement. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. You can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at Lib Dem Pod. If you really want to be nice, you could subscribe to our exclusive Patreon subscription, our fan site. It helps keep the podcast going. We're not one of these, overbearing party structures. We do our best to keep you guys informed. So if you do want to do that, we would love you to do that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Mark and Dorothy.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.